Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to the TV learning programs, and I'm teacher Herbert, and I will be taking you through the biology of senior 3, and we are still on unit 8 on unit 3, which is concerning about nutrient cycle. Before we start our lesson, I'll remind you to take a notebook, a pen, and an exercise book, and you note some important concept and some concerning about that unit. And I also let you to inform the parents to also to be around where necessary. They can also help you in a study time. So today we are still on the same unit, which is concerning about nutrient cycle, and we are going to go unit 4, lesson 4, which is concerning about phosphorus cycle. And phosphorus cycle has been wrong with water cycle, carbon cycle, and nitrogen cycle. So we're going to talk about a phosphorus cycle and how does phosphorus keep saturating in the earth and in atmosphere. As we know that carbon is normally found in atmosphere, nitrogen is also found in atmosphere, but phosphorus is not found in atmosphere, and it is very important. It is very important for making the cell membrane, forming the structure of DNA and RNA, and also in production of ATP. So it is very essential for both plants and animals. So the learning objective of the lesson, that was making an introduction of the lesson. So we have to have learning objectives, describing the phosphorus cycle, and explain the process of phosphorus cycle. So we're going to first understand where do we normally find phosphorus. As I mentioned it earlier, phosphorus is an essential nutrient for both plants and animals in the form of phosphates, I may say making about phosphate ions, and even hydrogen phosphates. That's where we can also talk about phosphorus can just be very important, very essential for both plants and animals. And we can have phosphorus in form of phosphate ions and even hydrogen phosphate ions. And phosphorus forms a part of the DNA, and genes, the RNA, the structure of the cell membrane, and also it is also a molecule that stores energy that is in form of ATP. I think everybody, you do remember what is ATP in full. Adenosine triphosphate. It is once you get a phosphate group plus another phosphate group, you get a triphosphate. It is adenosine triphosphate, and which is energy stored in living organisms, that is in animals. Students, I would like to ask you, do you still remember where ATP is stored in our body? Which organelle is responsible for storing energy in our body? Think about it, and I remind you to be able to remind me that organelle that is responsible for storing energy in form of ATP in our body. I think you remember the organelle is mitochondria. All right? So the mitochondria is an organelle that stores ATP. So we have phosphate, and we said phosphate is very essential for both plant growth and also for animals because they make the structure of the DNA, the structure of RNA, as well as the cell membrane, and also responsible for energy production. I said the fats. Fats are also made up of phosphate, and fats are also a source of energy production because we know that fats also releases more energy, and I think you do remember that fats also produces energy, but it requires more oxygen to be oxidized. The building blocks of certain plants, of humans, and animal bodies such as bones and teeth, are very important. They contain phosphorus. So in general, we can conclude by saying that phosphorus is very essential for both plant growth and animals because they make the building blocks of certain parts of the plants and even animals, human, such as bones, teeth, DNA structure, RNA structure, the structure of the cell membrane, and energy production. All those things I'm mentioning, they contain phosphorus. Phosphorus cycle is another biological cycle that we are going to discuss it today. If I talk about biological cycle, it is a biological cycle. What do you understand by the term biological cycle? I would give you a small time to think about it. If I talk about phosphorus is like other biological cycles that I've been mentioning. I've been mentioning about, along with water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. So phosphorus is also another biological cycle. And another biological cycle, and I mentioned that phosphorus does not exist in atmosphere. It appears in the earth, all right, in animals and as well as in plants. So let's have the term biological cycle, a pathway by which a chemical substances move through biotic and abiotic compartments on the earth. So the movement of these substances, both through biotic and abiotic compartments on the earth, are referred to as a biological cycle. What are biotic factors? What are abiotic factors? Take your time and think about what are biotic factors and what are biotic factors. As I was trying to mention what biological processes, phosphorus is also among the biological processes. And I mentioned biological processes is the pathway by which a chemical substances move through biotic and abiotic compartments on the earth. So biotic, the word biotic, the word bio means life. We can have very many things which possesses life. Take an example, human. Take an example, animals. Most of the animals, birds, are biotic factors. So the passing of these phosphorus from living things to non-living things is referred to as a biological cycle. A biological cycle. So biological cycle, that is the passing of substances moving through biotic and abiotic compartments on the earth is referred to as biological cycle. A biological cycle. So phosphorus is among the biological cycle that I've mentioned. Phosphorus cycle is a raw process. If I talk about it as a raw process, and it involves 4 key steps. What are those key steps that we are going to be discussing before we just talk about the diagrams? Think about the processes, and we are going to have a discussion of those processes that are involved in the phosphorus cycle. We have number 1 is weathering. Weathering. What is weathering? We have absorption. We have decomposition. And we have sedimentations. We are going to go through these processes that are involved, the 4 steps, the 4 key steps that are involved in phosphorus cycle. Weathering. Weathering, most of the time, phosphorus is normally found on rocks. Rocks, that's where we normally found abundant percentage of phosphorus on rocks. When it rains and the phosphorus is going to be removed from the rocks and is going to be taken to the water bodies and even to the sea and oceans because of weathering. So phosphorus can just be circulating into water bodies, and once it is circulating into water bodies, that is automatically because of rain, and which will just washing away of the phosphorus from the rocks and carried to the water bodies. And that is weathering. That one makes the phosphorus to saturate on the earth. We have absorption. Absorption is another process that is also involved in a phosphorus cycle. If you talk about absorption, let me have some animals. We're talking about some animals. We're talking about some plants. Once it rains, because the phosphorus has been carried by water to the water bodies, the animals will drink water. And once they drink water, and that water contains phosphorus, which is going to be used for making the part of the animal's part, of the animal structures, all right? Once it rains, the plants will absorb water. And once it absorbs water, what happens? It also absorbs phosphorus. And that is done by means of what we call absorption. We have the third step, which is called decomposition. Decomposition is also involving how these phosphorus can just be released back to the atmosphere. Think about how is decomposition. Most of this decomposition is normally carried by bacteria. These bacteria, they are very important in causing some of the substances to decompose. Animals, they excrete waste products. After excreting the waste products, take an example, urine, take an example, cow dung, all these, they contain phosphorus. The bacteria, they cause animals and even plants, they can die. And once they die, these bacteria, they are able to convert to cause these animals and plants to decay. Specifically, these saprophytes, they normally depend on what you call dead, decayed organic matter. They will convert organic phosphate into inorganic phosphate, and the process is referred to as mineralization. And now that one keeps, after decomposition, now phosphorus is going to be released back to the atmosphere, into the earth or into atmosphere. And is going to be used back by the plants again during the process of absorption. We have sedimentations. When you talk about sedimentations, most of the rocks, and we have the rocks in the sea, we have some of the organisms that were normally found in the phosphorus can just be found in the rocks and even in the sea, sediments. That one is referred to as sedimentation. And that one, once, because of the process of weathering, now the phosphorus can also be released back to atmosphere. Let's have the chart that is going to be having all these processes: weathering, absorption. I said absorption involves by the plant absorbing phosphorus during the process of weathering. Decomposition. Once an animal dies, or once during the excreting of waste product, they can just be decomposed and now makes a continuous saturation of phosphorus in the atmosphere. I mentioned about sedimentation. I said most of the phosphorus are normally found in sediments of rocks, which keeps phosphorus to saturate on the earth. We have a flow chart that is trying to show you how phosphorus can just be saturated on the earth. We mentioned that phosphorus can just be found in phosphate ions and hydrogen phosphate ions. We have a number of them. We're going to go through it. And now if we are going to go about all these processes that are necessary for the process of phosphorus cycle. We have here, we have weathering. Because of weathering, we have phosphate in fossil, in rocks, and what we call guanos. It can just be found. You talk about guanos. These are the wastes from the birds. Guanos are the waste product from the birds. And phosphate fossils, these are normally found in rocks. Once it rains, the phosphorus, because of weathering, is going to be carried to the oceans. And in the oceans, it is going to be in phosphate in oceanic sediments. It is going to be uplifted over a time. After a certain period of time, the phosphate will just be released back to the atmosphere and is going to be taken by these phosphate fossils, will be acting as phosphate fossils in rocks and even guanos. Phosphate in form of what you call fertilizers. Once it is released back, it is going to be acting as a fertilizer. We have, and this is involving what you call weathering. We have another process, what you call decomposition. I talked about what you call decomposition. I said decomposition is involved by converting organic phosphate into inorganic phosphate, which is stored in the soil. This one is done by bacteria. As I mentioned about these excretory products, take an example, plants and animals die, they will decompose, and they contain phosphorus, which can just be converted into inorganic phosphate and stored in the soil and dissolved in the river. And it can also be, that is one way of, and it can also just be taken because it is in the soil. Because of rain, can also be run off to the oceans, and yet can also be released back to the fertilizers, which is going to be consumed by the plant. This is decomposition. We have another process which is called absorption. Decomposition, we start from here. Phosphate, we have organic wastes and remains, can also be released in oceans, and which can also be taken back into the atmosphere. We have absorption, and absorption, I said, this is where we have the plant phosphates. They're going to absorb phosphates by the process of absorption. Not even plants, even animals, they eat plants, and if they eat plants, the plant contains phosphorus, and that one makes phosphorus to be keeping saturating in animals, even in the atmosphere, in years. So that is a simple chart that summarizes phosphorus cycle. We can just remind ourselves the 4 steps that are involved in the phosphorus cycle. I talked about weathering, I talked about absorption, I talked about decomposition, and the last one is called sedimentation, where it can just be settled in rocks and even in ocean seas. I said phosphorus can just be found in earth, in water, and even in sediments. Unlike compounds of other cycles, other cycles, they are normally found in atmosphere. Take an example, the carbon dioxide, nitrogen. Phosphorus cannot be found in air, in a gaseous state. This is because phosphorus usually is liquid at normal temperatures and pressure. It exists mainly in water soil, and even sediments. In atmosphere, phosphorus can mainly be found as a very small dust particles. It means that I talked about phosphorus is a slow process. So once you find phosphorus in atmosphere, it is not in a gaseous state. We said phosphorus is normally found in a liquid state, but it can just be found in atmosphere, but in small dust particles. I said phosphorus moves slowly from deposits on the land and sediments to the living organisms. It moves more slowly back into the soil and water sediments. So this process of saturating of phosphorus cycle is the slowest of the nutrient cycle. Among all these processes, the phosphorus cycle is the slowest process among all these nutrient cycle. We are along with water cycle, carbon cycle, and even nitrogen cycle. Phosphorus salts are released from rocks through weathering, and usually dissolves in soil water and will be absorbed by the plants. The quantity of phosphorus in the soil are generally small. It is often the limiting factor of plant growth, because I mentioned phosphorus is among all the fertilizers that makes the plant grow. So it is, if there is absence of phosphorus in the soil, it can just be acting as limiting factors for plants to grow. That's why farmers often apply phosphate fertilizers on what you call farmland, and phosphates are also a limiting factor for plant growth and in marine ecosystem, because they are not very water soluble. So simply it is found in small amount and is needed by plants to grow. Animals absorb phosphates by eating plants, as I mentioned about what you call absorption. Animals, they can absorb phosphate because it is a building block of DNA structure and RNA structure, the cell membrane as well, and also energy production. So animal can get phosphate as an essential element of the body through eating the plant-eating animals. Phosphate cycle through plants and animals much faster than those in rocks and in sediments. So let's go on what you call, we are ending the phosphorus cycle. We've talked about the processes of phosphorus cycle. Let's talk about now the importance of supporting tree planting, because we have seen plants, they keep nitrogen saturating into atmosphere. And plants keeps phosphorus keeping saturating into atmosphere. Let's have what you call a supporting tree planting programs at home and school. Why do you have to have that program? Because we've talked about nutrient cycle, where we talked about with water cycle, we talked about plants play a big role in water cycle. We talked about plants play a big role in removing excess carbon dioxide in atmosphere, which can cause global warming. And as well as nitrogen cycle, we also talked about nitrogen cycle is also very important in our body because it makes some of the body structures. Take an example, the structure of DNA. Nitrogenous bases, they are made up of nitrogen. So it is very important now to have a supporting tree planting programs at our home and even school. In your school, do you have a program of planting trees? Because we have seen plants are very important. They are very essential in this nutrient cycle. So it is important to plant trees in school compounds and even in homestead so that enhance nutrient cycle. So to have nutrient cycle, to have this phosphorus cycle, to have this carbon cycle, to have this nitrogen cycle, it is very important to have a tree planting program at school as well as at our homestead. And it is done by transplanting tree seedlings. You get a seedling, you transplant it. Trees can use carbon dioxide in atmosphere. Once we have trees, we're going to breathe healthy air, and air which is not contaminated. So that's why we have to have a tree planting programs at our school and even at our homestead, because the plants are the ones to use carbon dioxide in atmosphere during the process of photosynthesis. So that its percentage remains, it means that the percentage of carbon dioxide should not exceed 0.03%. Once it exceeds, what will happen? We're going to have what we call global warming. We're going to have to receive what we call acidic rain and other outcomes that can come along with absence of tree planting or absence of tree programs at our homes. When this percentage is irritated due to deforestation, climatic change sets in within a daily consequences. Plants are the only organism that use atmospheric carbon dioxide in a substantial amount, thus stopping what we call global warming. So we have to plant the trees because if you plant the trees, we are enhancing what we call nutrient cycle. So trees play an important role in phosphorus cycle, in nitrogen cycle, in carbon cycle. So the trees are very important because we've seen that trees are very important in carbon cycle, in phosphorus cycle, and we have seen that phosphorus is very essential in our body. It is essential in plants and even in animals. So atmospheric nitrogen used by nitrogen-fixing bacteria to form nutrients which are absorbed by the plants. So the percentage of nitrogen is maintained at a safe percentage. If you talk about safe percentage, it means that the carbon dioxide has to keep it at a safe percentage, which is 0.03%. How are you going to go about it? We go about it by planting of trees. All right? How can we maintain nitrogen cycle? Because we said nitrogen is also very essential in our body. Essential in the formation of structure of the DNA, nitrogenous bases that forms our body structures, RNA that are found in our body. We talked about phosphorus, how it plays a very important in our body, making cell membrane, energy production in form of ATP. We talked about formation of the DNA and RNA because the skeleton of the DNA is made up of phosphate. The phosphate group is the backbone of the DNA, and you remember DNA is a unit of inheritance. So now it means that all these phosphorus, nitrogen, they have to be kept at a safe percentage. That is, say, carbon dioxide must be at a safe percentage when it is in atmosphere, 0.03%. And then nitrogen, it must be at 79%. Animal gets nutrients from plants. Without plants, nitrates cannot be used by animals directly. We cannot get nitrogen directly from atmosphere. So it must be absorbed by the plants, and hence it is going to be used by ourselves. So phosphorus is present in small quantities in the soil, The plants are the only organism that can get phosphorus from the soil, where animal gets phosphorus by absorption or by eating the plants. All nutrient cycles depends on plants. We have seen that plants are very important because they are the one that makes these nutrient cycle to keep saturating on the earth. Or the nutrient cycle depends on plants to be completely, especially trees and human beings, who depends on plants for carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus for their own use. In Rwanda, planting of trees has helped people not only as a fuel and firewood and charcoal, but also for controlling what you call soil erosion, for also making this nitrogen cycle to keep saturating. So student, I'm rewinding my lesson, and I have to leave you with a lesson assessment, and which you have to go through that lesson assessment, and I hope I will just work on it, and I will do it with you in the next onset lesson. We have almost two numbers. Number one is asking energy released from ATP when A, phosphate group is added, B, adenine bonds or to ribose, and then C, ATP is exposed to sunlight, and D, phosphate group is removed. Number two, phosphorus is different for plants and animals to access in nature because it reacts quickly with other elements like oxygen. B, most phosphorus in the environment is bound to carbon, nitrogen, and even hydrogen. C, it is typically found as phosphate. And then D, most phosphorus in the environment is stored in reservoirs. So students, thank you for your active listening and watching, and stay safe. Remember to wash your hands with a clean water and a soap, and stop these unnecessary movements to avoid this COVID-19. Thank you for being with me, and enjoy the rest of the day.